Hey guys, today I will dive deep into the topic of Ekko's mechanics. The way I'm gonna go about it is probably gonna be very different to what you're used to seeing in mechanics guides. I won't be showing you the basic combos etc. since I've already made a video about that and so have many other people. In this guide, I will talk about how to use Ekko's abilities effectively and what you should look to accomplish with your ability usage. The reason for this approach is that I believe playing Ekko at a high mechanical level requires a lot of active thinking and controlled ability usage. Simply seeing how his mechanics can be used and comboed without knowing how to use them efficiently is not enough for a lot of lower elo players to actually improve their mechanics. In the end, it will always be you, the person watching this, that has to input the correct clicks and make the right decisions. I can't help you with that, but with this video my goal is to help you get a deeper understanding of what the right decisions are, so you can identify your mistakes and become your own teacher. Let me know in the comments which topic you want to see next for the Ultimate Ekko Jungle Guide series. I've also thought about doing a game review of the best Ekko in the world, Zhao Laoban, focusing on his mechanics and highlighting the little details that most less experienced Ekko players might miss. If you would like to see that, be sure to leave a like on this video. Something I will add here before I go into Ekko's mechanics that I always talk about in my coaching sessions is the way you should think about the term mechanics in general. Whenever I ask my coachees what they think mechanics are, the most common answer is something along the lines of mechanics are how good you hit your spells. And while that is definitely part of mechanics, it really doesn't paint the whole picture. In a game of League of Legends, there are always 10 champions with 4 abilities plus a passive each. Your own champion only makes up 10% of those abilities in the game. The other 90% are from the champions around you. Being able to play around all the abilities in the game, especially the enemies, is what truly defines good mechanics. Having good mechanics is a lot more about knowledge than the actual inputs. This statement definitely varies from champ to champ, since some champions are more input reliant than others, but to become a mechanical god you will always need the knowledge of what all the abilities do and how they can be used no matter what champ you're playing. Knowing how abilities are used is something you usually learn with experience, so if you're just starting out, it is very unlikely that you're gonna be good mechanically right away. However, if you're determined to improve, you should at least put in the time to know what all the abilities in the game do. There is no logical reason to ever be surprised by an ability. Ekko's abilities need to be used in a very controlled manner to be effective. Controlled, however, does not mean slow. It means that you want to get the biggest value out of using your abilities. This technically applies to all champs in the game, but especially to ability-reliant champs such as Ekko. I'm gonna go through each ability and break them down into the tasks they accomplish, the reason you would want to use them, and the value you can expect to get from them. The reason I'm doing this is because understanding the different levels to how good an ability usage can be and then ranking it internally helps you make the right decisions and is the best way to improve mechanically. Just to be clear here, I'm not a robot, so when I'm playing the game I'm not actively ranking the ways in which I use the abilities, it is more so something that happens subconsciously. But I definitely think actively about how I use my abilities and how I can get the most value out of them, and so should you. I will also include Rocketbelt into his abilities, since I believe it is a firm part of Ekko's kit and allows him to be played at a much quicker pace. Ekko's passive is arguably his most important ability with the highest skill expression. The difference between good and bad Ekko players is usually how well they use the passive movement speed for spacing and how fast they're able to proc the passive. When I am playing really well, I sometimes become basically untouchable. So let's talk about what the passive provides for Ekko. Due to the 90% AP scaling of his passive, it provides the most damage in his kit overall. Because of that, it should be your highest priority to proc it on the targets you're fighting. The passive procs have a 5-second cooldown per target, so in teamfights you might want to proc it on multiple targets to deal the most amount of damage possible. Because the passive is such a large chunk of your damage, when chasing down enemies you often want to hold your spells until the timer is reset, so you can proc your passive for a second time right away with the help of your abilities. A little side note to add here is that the massive amount of passive damage in the late game is also the reason Ekko is very good at stealing objectives. The movement speed is arguably even more important for Ekko than the damage, since he is supposed to be played as a skirmish assassin. This means you go in and out of fights in short bursts where the enemies don't get a lot of time to attack you. The movement speed helps tremendously with being able to run out of enemy range after dealing your damage and still stay in range to engage again when your abilities are off cooldown. This is the second reason why you would want to proc your passive on multiple targets in teamfights, since keeping up the movement speed is gonna make fighting a lot easier. Also, you are usually using your main movement spell, the E, to engage fights, so you need the movement speed to stay out of range. The passive is also the biggest reason why you need to play with your cooldowns. I can't stress enough how important it is to really play around them. If you're fighting without your abilities, it takes a long time to proc your passive, which results in you having to stay too close to the enemies and taking a lot of damage. Especially in late game teamfights, you need to play very patiently and only engage into fights when your cooldowns are available. When trying to escape, the generally most successful play is to prioritize proccing the passive and then running away. Overall, Ekko's passive is at the heart of his kit since you're always playing around it in combination with your other abilities. The Q is Ekko's most spammable ability. It provides a lot of value both offensively and defensively. Ekko's Q is his most important ability for being able to proc the passive. The outgoing Q as well as the return Q each apply a passive stack. Due to the Q slowing targets for up to 60%, it also helps in being able to keep targets in range for an auto attack that applies the third passive proc. It is important to know that the outgoing Q deals slightly more base damage in the early game, but gets outscaled by a lot in the later stages due to the 60% AP scaling on the return Q versus 30% on the outgoing Q. Because of this, hitting the return Q has a high priority when trying to maximize damage. The best way to achieve this is by playing with the passive movement speed and using your E or Rocketbelt to position behind enemies. Unless you're able to finish someone off with auto attacks, it is also generally correct to stop attacking to make sure you run behind the enemy and hit the return Q, since this will result in more damage dealt. As I already mentioned, the Q slows by up to 60%. Because of this, it can of course also be used defensively when running away or to keep enemies at range. A lot of people underestimate how great of a zoning tool Ekko's Q really is. Especially in smaller corridors, the Q can cover the whole area so nobody can chase you and you can decide when to engage the enemy. If the enemy decides to tank both instances of the Q, then you should look to proc the passive with your E and run. Most of the time, the enemies won't be able to punish this and you will take away a substantial amount of their HP. This is especially important against melee champs such as Master Yi or Warwick. If you use your Q effectively against them, they will have a really hard time attacking you. It is important to note here that only the outgoing Q slows, however. In teamfights, you should often throw your Qs out many times to see if you can either apply some passive stacks or simply zone the enemy team. Due to its rather short cooldown, it is, as I said, a spammable ability, and most of the time it doesn't put Ekko in great danger when it is on cooldown. Another both offensive and defensive quality that the Q can provide that is often overlooked is the slow to keep targets inside your W. Using the EQ combo to engage enemies that are currently inside your W helps a lot in being able to stun them. At the same time, keeping them in your W when you're low HP can help you escape. Ekko's W is in my opinion his most interesting and important spell that makes up a big part of his skill expression. Very fitting with this theme, you actually have to look a couple seconds in the future to use it effectively. Because of that, it is also the spell that a lot of Ekko players struggle in using. On top of the active, this spell also has a passive which you need to be aware of. If the enemy is below 30% HP, your auto attacks deal a substantial amount of missing health damage. The lower HP the enemy is, the easier it is to execute them. This often allows you to finish off enemies in fights and is another big reason to play Ekko patiently and wait for good opportunities to engage. The active provides immense offensive, defensive and even general utility. The long cooldown of this ability already tells you a lot about its power level. A massive mistake I see almost all the players that I have coached make is to simply not use the W when fighting. There are basically never fights you want to take without using this spell when it is off cooldown. It is an integral part of Ekko's kit and it is impossible to play him at a high level without using it. Without the shield, Ekko is very squishy and not using it generally results in way too many deaths. The 150% AP scaling allows the shield to provide you with over 1000 extra HP in the late game fights that last for 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds are usually enough time to proc your passive and run, or simply tank some damage and finish off an enemy. This value alone is enough to always use it even if you don't hit any enemies with it. The time where your shield is active should be the time you engage the enemies. The main offensive quality of this spell is of course the stun, which lasts for an insane 2.25 seconds and covers a big area. Also important to note here is that the zone of the W also slows by 40% even when you are not able to step into it. This can allow you to catch up when chasing or slow enemies down when being chased without having to get close to them. The most successful Ws are usually casted from outside of the enemy's vision. This is incredibly important since hiding the cast animation makes the time window for the enemies to react much shorter. One thing I like to do in the late game, especially when the W cooldown isn't as long anymore, is to go fishing by placing the W in brushes where I expect enemies to be. In the late game you generally have high enough range to follow up into the W quickly and stun enemies. An important detail to note here is that the W cast range is very long. If you cast the W at max range, you will always be out of the natural vision of the enemies. This info is especially useful when you want to engage an enemy head-on through a lane. Another great way to stun enemies in your W is to play with your teammates' CC abilities. If your teammates are able to CC someone inside your W zone, the enemies will be stunned for a long time, which should generally result in a kill. The best synergies here are with champions like Lissandra or Malzahar that have high duration point-to-click CC. To get the maximum value out of your stun, you sometimes don't want to step in it right as it spawns. The sphere lingers for 2.5 seconds, in which you can still trigger it. An example where this can play a big role is the Yi matchup. Since Yi will always come out of his Q after the same amount of time, if you time stepping into your W correctly, you can stun him right away. Due to the W making up such a large area, it is also a great zoning tool. Especially in river or jungle fights, the W blocks off a huge area where the enemies are not allowed to move for 2.5 seconds. An example when this zoning is especially useful is when an objective like the Dragon or Baron is about to die and you know the enemies want to move in to steal it. Or when sieging a tower so the enemies can't defend it properly. Simply casting the W on top of the objective creates a difficult choice for the enemies. As I said, the W lingers for 2.5 seconds, so in total it can give you up to 4.5 seconds of zoning ability. 2.5 seconds are made up of the ability itself, and then 2 more seconds of Ekko with a massive shield who can look to engage. Some nice utility the W provides is the vision it grants while the sphere is active. Combined with the long cast range, it allows you to safely check for vision in brushes or on the neutral objectives. With the shield and the zoning the W provides, it is also an extremely important tool for stealing objectives. Combined with the passive, this makes Ekko one of the best objective stealers in the game. There's a lot of nuance to using Ekko's W, and how efficient the usage is will always be influenced by your ability to read the enemy's movement, which is a skill that naturally builds over time and with experience. However, the most important takeaway should be to use it at all, so you at least get some kind of value out of it instead of just leaving it off cooldown. It is always better to use this incredibly powerful spell at 50% efficiency than to not use it at all. Ekko's E is his main movement spell that allows him to get into and out of range of enemies. As with every spell in Ekko's kit, it has both a lot of offensive as well as defensive value. The cooldown is similar to the one of the Q, but nonetheless, it is an ability that should not be spammed. It is Ekko's non-ultimate spell that needs to be used most carefully, since the defensive value can often be much greater than the offensive one. An important note here is, however, that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Oftentimes you can use the E in a both offensive and defensive manner at the same time to get great value out of it. The first instance of the E dashes you 325 units in the direction you're aiming it, and the second instance makes Ekko's auto attack a blink with 300 extra range. There are a lot of niche mechanics that this blink allows Ekko to do, such as following people when they flash, and there are a lot of walls that Ekko can dash over with the first instance of the E, but I'm gonna talk about all of these things in another chapter of the Ultimate Ekko Jungle Guide. Also important to note is that you can cast all of his other abilities while dashing, but as I said, I already made a video about these combos. The obvious offensive value of the E is to use it to engage the enemy and then attack them with the empowered auto attack. Combined with the Rocketbelt, this can be an incredibly quick engage that can catch people off guard. However, it is important that you only use the E to engage when you're either able to proc your passive so you're able to run away afterwards, or to finish off low HP targets. A little bit less obvious is the offensive usage of the dash to position yourself in a way where you hit the enemies with your return Q. As I already said when talking about the Q, this has a high priority to get the maximum amount of value out of your spells. Ekko's E also resets his auto attack timer, which is especially important if you're playing with Lich Bane, since then you won't have a lot of attack speed, so using this mechanic makes a big difference. A great way to practice getting used to the auto attack reset is to do it while clearing jungle monsters. The defensive value of the E is also rather obvious, since it is a dash that can be used to dodge abilities. However, it is not just the dash but also the blink that can be used to dodge abilities, and even get out of the Veigar cage, since it will teleport you to your target location if there is a target in range. As I said, Ekko's E doesn't have to be used either offensively or defensively, but it can be used as both at the same time. As soon as you use the blink to dodge an ability, you have achieved this and got great value out of the spell. Here's a nostalgic clip I posted on Reddit 6 years ago that perfectly showcases this. A good reason why you might want to hold your E in certain situations is to follow people. Generally, the highest damage output is of course achieved if you use the E right away with the auto attack reset, but if the enemies are out of range, you can't deal damage to them at all. So when you can kill an enemy without the need of the E damage right away, and they're likely to flash away or escape over a wall, holding your E can be very valuable. Especially in lower elos, people won't respect this and flash away using their 5-minute cooldown just to be chased down by you anyways. Even though the cooldown of the E is not very long, using this spell without much thought can put Ekko at a great risk of dying. On top of that, it is also a very important spell to combine to get the most value out of all his other abilities. The ultimate ability provides Ekko with a clear offensive and defensive value, since it heals and has the ability to deal damage as well. However, the ult can also be used to dodge spells or even get back on the map faster after recalling. Generally, you should think of the ult as a tool that allows Ekko to look for and get away with more active plays. Oftentimes when the ult is on cooldown, you should look to play more passively and only take fights with your W. This is a big reason why Ekko Jungle is superior to Ekko Mid, since you can often choose to clear your jungle while your ult is on cooldown and not be at a risk of dying. The defensive value of this spell is most obvious. It can be used to escape sticky situations by teleporting you back to where you were 4 seconds ago and healing you. It is important to know that it heals you substantially more the more damage you took in the last 4 seconds. This means you often don't want to ult at 1 HP at the last possible moment, but instead ult in the next 4 seconds after taking a massive amount of burst, even if you still have some HP left. There are situations in which you might not even be at an immediate risk of dying, but should still ult to get back HP to be able to keep playing the game. The offensive usage is where you can really express your skill with the ult. Similar to the W, you will also have to plan ahead into the future to be able to hit it. In lower elos, people are usually not very aware of the ult clone, so you can often just use it when people are standing inside it. However, in higher elos, people are definitely more aware of it. This is why not skilling the ult at level 6 makes a huge difference. I was thinking about including this tip in the video about more niche mechanics, but I believe it makes such a huge difference in being able to hit the ult that I'm including it here. Not skilling the ult hides the clone, which means that the enemies won't even know if you have used your ult, and they will have a much harder time knowing where your ult is gonna land if you use it. Of course, knowing where the ult clone will be yourself requires a lot of experience. In my opinion, as soon as you feel comfortable with Ekko's general mechanics, you should incorporate this trick into your gameplay. All of Ekko's spells can be combined very well with his ult, most notably the W and E. When you're planning to ult back in a teamfight, it is usually a good idea to place the W close to your ult clone, so you have a shield sometime after ulting back. You will often need this shield, especially when ulting into multiple enemies. Using the first E instance before ulting back is also not a bad idea if you have a target that you want to burst on quickly at your ult location, since then you won't have to dash first. In situations where you are running away, it is also a great idea to throw your Q before ulting back to apply passive stacks. If you are able to proc your passive while hitting someone with your ult, it is very likely that they get one shot. As with the W, there is a lot of experience needed to use the ult offensively to great effect, but I want you to know that it is generally not necessary to use his ult offensively to have success with Ekko. I've had people tell me that they don't like using the ult when they can't hit anyone with it, but that is definitely the wrong mindset. It is always better to not die and use it at 50% efficiency than to not use it at all. The Rocketbelt is of course not technically part of Ekko's kit, but I believe it unlocks a whole other level of playmaking for Ekko. I've said this many times, but to me Ekko doesn't even feel like a full champion without the Rocketbelt. It increases his engage range by a substantial amount and can be used to speed up his combos. Every now and then it will even provide you with defensive value when you need it to dodge spells or run away. The reason I wanted to include it here as well is because it is generally the spell that people use with the least efficiency. It is a 40-second cooldown and you should value it as such. Most of the time when coaching people, I see them using it only for the damage, even though that is the smallest value it provides in my opinion. The biggest value the Rocketbelt provides for Ekko is the massive increase in range. It does so by dashing you forward and giving you 30% movement speed towards the enemy for 1.5 seconds. This range increase is often needed to reach the backline and assassinate them. In a lot of situations, the Rocketbelt can also be used to get into range to auto-attack an enemy that is kiting away. The other great value it provides, which is usually completely underutilized by inexperienced Ekko players, is the auto attack reset. When using your Rocket Belt, it resets your auto attack timer similar to how your E does it. With this you can engage an enemy and proc your passive extremely quick. If you manage to pull this off in lower elos, I can guarantee you that people won't even react with their defensive abilities in time. The last value the Rocket Belt provides is of course the damage. To me this is more of a bonus, and compared to other mythics it is definitely not a lot of damage. However, it is not nothing, and if you like playing with the Dark Harvest setup, it can be used to proc it and sometimes even finish people off. In the late game, the Rocket Belt usually has a higher cooldown than your ult, which should tell you that it is a valuable spell. Mastering how to play with the Rocket Belt in combination with your other spells is how your gameplay is gonna become very quick and smooth. The biggest conclusion I want you to take away from this video is that all of Ekko's abilities have an offensive as well as defensive value. For this reason, it is very easy to not die as Ekko even when you get caught, and you should think of almost all your deaths as a big mistake where you could have played better. The amount of value you can get out of your ability usage can vary drastically, and I hope this video gives you a better understanding of what you should look to accomplish with your spells. As with everything in League of Legends, there are endless variables at play here, so you will always have to adapt to certain situations, and none of the things I said in this video are gonna be true 100% of the time. The best way to learn quickly is by watching how good Ekko players use their abilities and imitate them. If you found this video helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for the next chapter of the Ultimate Ekko Jungle Guide. If you want to learn from me and watch me live, you can follow me at twitch.tv/Ekkoliner. In the description you can also find a link to my Discord with all the information about my coaching services. And with that, have a great day my fellow Ekko enjoyers.